Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. This will be a Blu-ray review, but of a long-awaited title that I know I personally have been looking forward to for a substantial amount of time, seeing as it first had foreign releases, and then the pandemic hit, and then finally Arrow Video announced they would be doing a US and UK release with all of those extras plus some new ones, and finally doing this film more justice on the Blu-ray HD format. And that film, of course, is a film I think is a masterpiece, even though it has many, many problems. It was never quite finished. It was taken away and really butchered. But every time I see it, I fall in love with it over again. It's an endlessly fascinating film that I think is rewarding to any who like to study troubled productions. But all that said, even though it is problematic, I still think it's a masterpiece. And that, of course, is the 1965 Sam Peckinpah directed masterpiece, Major Dundee. Here in the lovely new Arrow Video 2-disc deluxe release. This is the limited edition packaging with the lovely J card, as they usually do. It says beautiful newly commissioned art which wraps around the spine, and as usual in the sort of very hardbound hard case, as Arrow does with all of their limited packages like this. So Dundee has a long and torturous history. Its production was extraordinarily troubled. It was the first major large budget film that, feature film I should say, that Sam Peckinpah wound up being at the helm at, this coming after the iconic masterpiece Ride the High Country from 1962. That and his television success basically made him a more bankable name, and it was settled that he would be the one to direct Major Dundee, which is a very interesting film that sort of straddles multiple different genres. It's technically a Western, it's a Civil War film, but it's in the completely different theater of war, and features, of course, the titular Major Dundee, played by Charlton Heston, who has been essentially punished for not obeying command orders during Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg, and so he's basically been thrown out to run this Confederate prisoner camp out in the West, away from the major theater of war. So essentially, he has to sit out the rest of the Civil War in punishment. And then the film opens with an Apache group under Sierra Cheriba is the leader's name, who commits a massacre at a homestead, then also kills an entire cavalry contingent. And so Dundee seizes upon this and uses Confederate prisoners and a group of black soldiers amongst the small amount of men that he has, and then leads them off into Mexico on his own mission, essentially in an ego trip to try and make himself viewed as a hero for capturing or destroying the Apache, as the film brings that specific line of dialogue into play multiple times. And that is basically the setup of the idea that it becomes essentially Dundee's mad quest in Mexico off on his own with this motley crew, and to essentially reestablish himself and get back into the major theater of war and move up the chain of command by making himself this heroic figure. It is a really fascinating character study because, of course, you have both Union and Confederate soldiers serving in this quest, and the Confederates are led by Captain Tyreen, played by the incredible Richard Harris, who basically goes toe to toe with Heston's Dundee for the entire film. They are old friends turned bitter rivals. They have a lot of back history, and their performances really, they spar with each other beautifully. This film is full of many rich performances, but the two key ones are Charlton Heston and Richard Harris. The film is, of course, filled with many faces we would come to know as the Sam Peckinpah stock company of sorts. So you see L.Q. Jones, and Warren Oates has a nice role. Then, of course, many other faces, Dub Taylor among them, and, of course, the iconic Slim Pickens is even in this film. It is definitely a bit of a mixed bag, unfortunately, because they started with a really long screenplay that really didn't have a finished third act, and then before they went to shoot the film, the major other stumbling block was, of course, they had agreed on making a $4.5 million roadshow epic with intermission and about a 3-hour runtime, in the tradition established by previous successes like Lawrence of Arabia, for example. So at the last minute, there was a regime change of sorts, and Columbia cut the budget down to $3 million. It was then supposed to be a standard movie and no longer a roadshow film. So of course they went down to Mexico, and essentially Peckinpah decided to shoot the movie they had originally agreed to make, and the budget did eventually, balloon, and what the film wound up costing about the same 4.5 million as originally intended. As soon as they got to Mexico, things went off the rails, and of course, Peckinpah was supposed to write and finish the film as they went along shooting, which is never an easy thing to do, and never a good sign to start a production in that manner. So essentially, Dundee was doomed from the start. If you really study the production history, which this release does extensive research into, and the materials here really give you essential background into the film, it's really impossible to look at Dundee without knowing something about the production history and the background and how this film came to be, and especially how it was hacked down and taken away into the theatrical release version, which really did tons of butchering to great material that was originally there. Now, had the film actually been allowed to be shown in its complete version, all we can do is really speculate if it would be the triumphant masterpiece that certain people or Peckinpah himself later would claim that it would have been. It probably wouldn't have been what we think of, but nonetheless, I still do think this film is a masterpiece, simply because every element in it is so strong and so fascinating, and I fall in love with it every time I come back to it. It becomes an obsession of sorts, and for the longest time, I thought it was just me coming to this film the first time as a young person, really starting to get more into Sam Peckinpah's works. But really, without question, Dundee is the stepping stone between the early triumph of A Ride the High Country, shown here in the Warner Archive Edition Blu-ray, and the groundbreaking, genre-defying, just upheaval that came with The Wild Bunch. So really, without Dundee, you would not have The Wild Bunch. And of course, after Dundee's box office failure and Peckinpah fighting the studio a bit, he was essentially blackballed, and it seemed like his career was over. But it did take some time, and a very well reviewed television production of the story Noon Wine that essentially got Peckinpah in people's good graces again. And then when he came to do The Wild Bunch, it was essentially the notion of this time we do everything right, and essentially it is a comeback picture, and it is also carrying on a lot of the ideas that are present in Dundee. And it is said that Peckinpah did even do some slow motion footage, but it probably wasn't as planned out and choreographed as it was in the iconic usage in The Wild Bunch. But much of the character arcs, a lot of the grittiness, you see stuff emerging in Major Dundee essentially, and all of it becomes The Wild Bunch. So again, you cannot have The Wild Bunch without Major Dundee. Major Dundee is a hugely important film in Sam Peckinpah's career, not just for it being a failure and almost destroying his career, but what that experience did to him, and how he rebounded after that into The Wild Bunch. Of course, Dundee was taken away from Peckinpah, who was barred from the studio in the editing process by the time they actually even finished the film. And of course, it still had story issues, but his completed cut was somewhere between 2.5 and 3 hours. It's reputed there is maybe some evidence or rumors of a longer, maybe 4 hour or so rough cut of the film, but it probably would have clocked in at around somewhere between 2.5 hours and 3 hours had Peckinpah been allowed to finish it properly. And that's the material that everyone would like to find. Unfortunately, of course, Peckinpah did not at all get on with his producer, Jerry Bresler, who made his own cut, essentially a producer preview cut of 136 minutes, and they wound up fighting tooth and nail throughout the entire production, and very quickly were no longer on speaking terms. Just reading into this production, it was a very unpleasant film to be working on, just from the overall experience being out in the middle of nowhere in Mexico on location. But after the 136-minute cut was made, which Peckinpah had many issues with and vehemently wrote letters about, complaining vociferously, Columbia took it upon themselves to cut the film further, and they cut it down to just over 2 hours, basically about 122 minutes, and just hacked things apart. And then the score was not chosen by Peckinpah, and a lot of people have many issues with it. The Daniel Amphitrioff score, I'm probably mispronouncing his last name. It is a tricky name to pronounce. And of course, the film then had the horrendously inappropriate title song slapped on it. One of the worst title songs to ever be slapped on a film that sticks out like a sore thumb. Like, this is literally one of the absolute worst, which of course is Fall In Behind the Major by Mitch Miller and his sing-along gang over the footage of the aftermath of the Apache massacre with the opening titles, which really doesn't fit. So the bizarre, cynical side of me likes that it was placed over that. So even though it should have never been in the film, it's placed over the scene of a massacre. So you can't help but just go, did anybody actually watch this? And of course, that was the major selling point of the soundtrack release, which I have here. This is the original Columbia stereo LP. And I'm such a nerd for this film that, yes, I have the soundtrack release, and this is really the only one there is. So this is it. And of course, great prominence is given to the title song theme. This was the state the film existed in, especially here in the States, pretty much for most of its history, until Sony undertook a restoration, which resulted in the extended version in 2005, which I have here on the DVD release. This was the first time I was able to see the film as a teenager, so I bought the DVD and started watching the film, and was just completely enraptured by what I was seeing, even though it was a little bit messy, and I had read a little bit about the production history and it being just a total nightmare. But I've been fascinated by the film ever since, and the first time I saw it, I thought it was a masterpiece. I don't really bother with the theatrical cut because this puts back the 15 or so minutes and basically recreates the 136-minute Jerry Bresler producer cut. So it's not a director's cut. I think it is wise to call it, the extended version, which is what Sony did. They also commissioned a brand new score by Christopher Caliendo and did a new 5.1 mix. That's very tasteful, but I have to say I never listened to it. I'm not really a big fan of the new score, and I listened to the film's original mono mix with the Amphitrioff score, which I actually do prefer. There are some spots that it doesn't quite work, but for the most part it works quite well. It's just the god awful opening title song slapped on there, which is just hysterically inappropriate. This did have a number of nice extras. It had a commentary track from the usual grouping of Peckinpah scholars and biographers who have done most of the commentaries on Peckinpah films on DVD and Blu-ray, along with some of the little scraps of material left over that show some of the deleted scenes, which unfortunately are incomplete or missing sound, but we do get some glimpses of that. Then there's an excerpt from the Mike Siegel's epic documentary on Peckinpah, The Passion and Poetry Project, which he has done on DVD and been doing extras from and culling things from interviews he's collected from people for that and other things. So he's done a lot of extras and documentaries and featurettes on a lot of Peckinpah films. And what's interesting about that is that will reappear in much greater form on the Arrow release. It did also include the vintage Writing for a Fall featurette, which also is on the Arrow disc, which is really the only major sort of promotion that Columbia seems to have done. They seem to want to just bury this film and get it over with. And then, of course, it included the new trailer made for this version as well, which apparently did get a limited theatrical run. I would absolutely love to see this film on the big screen, at least at some point. So we come to the Arrow release, and again, this is the lovely hard case packaging with this gorgeous wraparound art. It really looks like a vintage book with this beautiful hand-painted artwork. And again, it makes a nice wraparound image. Then inside, you have a absolutely gorgeous, very, very hefty and feeling booklet with a number of fantastic essays, and the whole thing is on this very nice glossy paper stock. So, and it's got a nice weight to it, and it is loaded with just some absolutely beautiful images from the film, just wonderfully done. And what's also great about this, it has that nice premium feel to it. It's not just your traditional booklet tucked in, and it's filled with multiple essays, just talking about all kinds of different facets of Dundee. Essentially, this is one of those films that once you get into it, you can't ever get out of it. It takes over a corner of your brain. It becomes a real obsession, and it was something I thought that it was just me being kind of crazy, but that for loving this film so much. But once I encountered, actual critical pieces and then the extras on the DVD, and over the years, I started to hear more people who were equally fascinated by this film and its troubled history, and trying to piece it back together, and what would Peckinpah's original edit have been like, what would the slow motion footage have looked like if it was back there, what would the film have been like had they been able to finish the original opening, setting up the massacre at the beginning. It's so full of many different ideas that it's beyond fascinating. And then a really wonderful touch I love on the back, they actually recreated the Viva Dundee graffiti that we see in the Mexican village sequence, which of course is pretty much the precursor to the exact same scene we see in the Wild Bunch. So there are so many things in Dundee that are literally version 1 of the Wild Bunch. Now, for the discs themselves, Arrow has gone the route of doing the lovely textured cardstock digi cases. I never know exactly what you call these, so it's not an actual standard Amaray or Scanovo. Beautiful art carrying over, and these are on white. So disc 1 is the extended version, the Sony restoration, which was completed in 4K. This is presented on Blu-ray with both the Christopher Caliendo score in 5.1, and most importantly, the original mono mix with the Amphitrioff score is on here, which was my major problem with the Twilight Time Blu-ray. That was the film's first Blu-ray release, and I would have gotten it, but it didn't include the original mono for the extended version, which is my preferred method of watching the film. So I decided I would wait till it went on sale or something, and of course it sold out almost immediately, and I regretted it ever since. But thankfully, this finally replicates or corrects that error, and it does seem to be the exact same 4K Sony master that has graced the Twilight Time and the other Blu-rays that have come out from Explosive Media in Germany, and then the imprint label in Australia. Now, this one, image-wise, seems pretty much the same, but I got to say, it definitely looks beautiful frequently throughout. The film is beautifully photographed. It's full of many striking images. You can see a nice natural green structure peeking in. My only complaint with the image would be is the encoding is not quite as strong or as robust, shall we say, as the Twilight Time, which is still the if you look on Capsaholic or you put the disc side by side, it is definitely a bit more robust in the encoding department. Most people are not going to notice that difference, and they'll put this on, and given the elements, there are some moments that do look a little bit more ropey, for example, but that's just the nature of the restored footage. But I just wish the encoding was a little bit better on this. That's its really only draw. So for the more technically inclined out there, the Twilight Time still has the best encoding for the film in terms of its overall bit rate, but this is still a beautiful presentation and fixes the error of the Twilight Time, because this allows you to watch the extended version with the mono original mix, which to me is the way to go. But this, of course, still has the restored version's opening credits. So disc 1 is, of course, for the extended version. This is from a 4K scan from Sony's restoration and reconstruction of the 136-minute producer's cut, restoring about 15 minutes of material missing from the theatrical version. This has been the standard version in print everywhere since they first completed this back in 2005 and released it on DVD. So if you've seen Major Dundee since then, you've most likely, very thankfully, like I always have, seen the extended version. I've, of course, since seen the theatrical version in other releases, but this is pretty much the standard version. And this is what you should go with. You really shouldn't even bother with the theatrical version unless you're a glutton for punishment or you like seeing hacked apart theatrical versions of films, or if you really just feel the need to try the shorter theatrical version, although I really very strongly advise against it. But at least on this Arrow release, you do have the option to look at the theatrical version if you wish. Again, most of the extras are on this particular disc, which again, just to stress, contains both the original Daniel Amphitrioff original score in the mono mix and the Christopher Caliendo 5.1 mix with his new score on it that Sony commissioned in 2005. But Arrow always gives you the breakdown. Just to read through these very quickly. So you get the commentary that was on the DVD with the Peckinpah scholars. So that means Nick Redman, the late Nick Redman, David Weddle, Garner Simmons, and Paul Sador. Then a new commentary with the great Glenn Erickson of Cine Savant fame and Alan K. Rhodey, who is a fantastic biographer who just did the great Michael Curtiz biography. They have a really great commentary track. And then the third commentary is done by Erickson solo, specifically focusing on the variations the film went through, the production history, and talking about the different edits to scenes. And really, that's been the most rewarding part of this for me is getting more background into that material, because it wasn't until I read Glenn Erickson's pieces back when he was doing the DVD Savant column, which is now turned into Cine Savant on the fantastic Trailers from Hell website. But he has done many articles and pieces on Dundee. He is perhaps one of the film's biggest fans and supporters, even though he is the first to acknowledge its many problems. That's the type of obsession that Dundee seems to inspire in those of us who love this darn thing. But he goes into excruciating detail that is just fascinating. So if you're a Dundee nerd, you've got to get this release, because the extras are really just phenomenal and get into factoids that really haven't been covered until now. And these were originally on the German and the Australian Blu-rays, but the roundabout way this got to me was I wanted to get the German explosive media release, but then COVID hit, and then that meant that I couldn't import discs from Germany, obviously, nor would that be a good idea. And then a while later, the Australian imprint release came out, but they were still we were still in lockdown, and the cost of importing just Major Dundee alone was quite substantial. So I waited a little while longer and have been regretting not getting the Twilight Time Blu-ray for years by that point. And then the thought of new extras and new commentaries was just driving me crazy that I couldn't listen to them yet. And then thankfully the Arrow decided to step in and do the US UK release. But they didn't stop there. I think the third commentary is exclusive to this particular release. But what they did was they went back to Mike Siegel, who I said would reappear. He recut pieces of his Passion and Poetry Peckinpah documentary and expanded upon it. So he made a specific feature-length expanded version of all the interviews and documentary that he made, the section on Major Dundee at that point in 1965 for Peckinpah's career. So that is expanded here with even more material added, and it is again totally feature length, and you start watching it and you can't stop. If you've seen his Passion and Poetry documentary, you will recognize certain elements that are repeated, because again, this is an expansion of that piece of the overall documentary. But all the materials that he's culled together over the years are just fascinating. So it was really great to see this expanded part of the Major Dundee section of the documentary he had already done. So that is called the Dundee Odyssey. And then He also put together it's a piece called Peckinpah Anecdotes, but it's the same interviewees going on about the just anecdotes about Dundee's production, really, with some Peckinpah anecdotes sprinkled in. So that was a nice piece, and the really rewarding one that I was very surprised about. It's a very expansive. Very detailed piece where it's Mike Siegel going through his early life and basically how he came to not just create but even want to make a feature-length career-spanning documentary on Sam Peckinpah, and how he set about it on a low budget and managed to get all these various interviews and piece it together and finally start getting into a few film festivals and things. So that's literally called Mike Siegel About the Passion and Poetry Project. Really insightful. And of course, I didn't know the whole backstory, although I had seen his documentary a number of years ago, and the various pieces and things that he's done for Peckinpah films on disc in the years since. So that's a really rewarding, insightful documentary there. And then also there's a really fantastic visual essay by David Cairns called Moby Dick on Horseback, which is the sort of unofficial title that is put on Dundee. I believe it was the actor Archie Armstrong kind of came up with that idea of that and that line. There are a number of Moby Dick connections one can make to Dundee. I don't know if it's 100% a re-envisioning of Moby Dick, but there are a number of significant linking elements. So I think that's a very apt title, and it's a really well done visual essay with a nice bit of humor thrown in, which is always helpful in making visual essays not feel so dry. So you then on top of that, there are some really fantastic stills galleries, and a lot of them put together by Mike Siegel with really rare production materials and production stills. And they're, of course, nice galleries kind of set to music, and you start watching those, and then there's several of them, so all of a sudden, before you know it, another 30 minutes has gone by, and then they include the 2005 re-release trailer that was narrated by L.Q. Jones. So this in and of itself is a standalone great release, and I believe when the limited edition is done, this will be the package with just the single disc. And it's still, in and of itself, this is a fantastic bevy of extras here. But the real key is the 3 audio commentaries, of which the first one we're used to from the DVD, and it's a good track. But the real meat of it is the second and third with Glenn Erickson and Alan K. Rhodey. Just absolutely fantastic, and well worth the wait of me waiting out those other 2 issues because of the pandemic and following lockdown period. So the exclusive portion of this will be disc 2, which covers the theatrical version here in a matching case with Tyrene on the front, and then matching art. And I like that, of course, the 2 sides of the central theme and argument and battle within the film and its characters are represented on each of the 2 discs. Now, of course, I will not usually ever really be watching the theatrical version outside of when I decide to study it, but I am really happy that it is included here because it is important to study for historical reasons, and it is from the same restoration master that Sony completed. However, this is credited as being from a 2K scan. When you do compare the Blu-rays, the source seems identical outside of the edits and the fact that it is the shorter and more heavily cut theatrical version. However, this does seem, transfer-wise, it seems a little softer, and obviously, if you didn't know one was 2K and one was 4K, you could actually probably make that guess because it looks that way, even though the source is the same. And I did notice maybe 1 or 2 specs in this, whereas there weren't any in the 4K master on the extended version. But it is from seemingly the same source. The only major difference is, of course, this has the original theatrical opening titles. It's the same size font, but the font itself is different. And of course, this credits the original score, whereas the extended version credits the new mix with the Christopher Caliendo score. And honestly, I'd forgotten that the theatrical version had stylized opening titles, and I wish they had kept that for the extended version. It's my one qualm with the extended cut, that they didn't keep the original title font, because it just looks a little bit fancier, whereas the extended version with the plain yellow font just looks a little flat. So I had forgotten about that. That's the major difference in terms of what you're going to be seeing on the disc, outside of the fact that this is the butchered theatrical version. But of course, even the extended version has been butchered from the supposed, Peckinpah long cut of the film. Now, the extras on here they seem like they're simple enough, but they're actually really essential as well. So this is where they tucked the vintage Riding for a Fall featurette, where you see some of the many done-for-real horse falls and really impressive stunt work that is on display throughout the film. And again, that's the only real promotional piece that Columbia made for the film on its release. So that's here on disc 2. As is the extended and deleted scenes and silent outtakes. Basically, it's pretty much the same material that turned up on the DVD, except here they got Glenn Erickson to actually record a commentary for each to discuss what the scene is, where it would have been originally placed, how it would have been edited, and why it was removed, and actually where they sourced it from, which is really interesting and revealing. So it's amazing we have this footage at all. But of course, the sad part is the condition is not that great, and the audio is lost. And it's always really interesting to see, because it runs all the way through. You'll actually see the slates and the guy coming in and actually slating it, which always gives you that sort of you are there time capsule feeling. And then last but not least, they include the original trailers for the film, which actually differ in a number of interesting ways in how they sold the picture, but they include the US, the British, and the German trailers, most of which actually came from Mike Siegel himself. So that I thought was a really nice, rewarding thing, and their brand new HD scans and things, some unfortunately rather degraded, but they also include versions of the trailers without any cropping, so you get the absolute full image of the trailer as it was scanned. I did not expect that to be in here. I just thought it was going to be the US theatrical trailer, but that was a really nice surprise that they actually made a full-on trailer gallery. And then, as another added part of the limited edition, every time somebody says they include a poster, it's like, yeah, that's nice and all, but we usually all just, fold it back and put it back in the box. But as usual with these limited editions, this is not simply just a poster, and this is really wonderfully done. So I'm going to try and unfold it so you can get a glimpse in terms of size and layout. So the poster is a horizontal design of the newly commissioned art, so that way you can actually hang this on your wall, which I would actually like to do. I would love to frame this. Try and hold it so you can see it without the creasing in it. And this is on nice paper cardstock as well. It's got a nice thickness to it, so this is very, very beautifully done, and this way you can get the new art without just having to stare over the spine of the case. But they made it reversible as well. And then here is a version of the original art. And again, beautifully printed. So as you can see now, I have the companion piece to the soundtrack release. See if I can get these to... So I knew it was going to be a poster, and I knew it was going to be the new art, but I was really thrilled to find that they included the original artwork on the reverse. And of course, the insert card about upcoming releases and their new streaming service. And that makes up the new Arrow Video 2-disc limited edition special release of Major Dundee. This package is beautifully done. My only real notes I could add, again, the disc one could have had a little bit more in terms of the bitrate encoding, but then again, it has a lot more in terms of extras on the disc as well when you compare it to the old Twilight Time release, and it does fix the problem of that release not allowing you to watch the extended version with the original mono audio mix with the original score, which again is a key selling point for me because that's how I watch the film. I love its quirks and its particular strange elements that most people find bizarre. Particularly, there's a little electronically generated almost chime noise that you hear several times in the film. Anytime the Apache appears or Sierra Chiriba appears or is mentioned, this little electronic note is heard, and I love that. It's absolutely bizarre. Totally threw me the first time I saw the film, but I adore that little sound effect. This film is just one of those. It really sticks with you. It's full of exceptionally strong performances from really the entire cast. So it really helps to smooth over the fact that there are some things that don't make sense. There's some things that are never explained, and the film really does start to fall apart in its third act. Although it has great ideas and great scenes, the third act was never really quite fleshed out either by the original writer, and then Peckinpah did what he could, but then also kind of would go off and do his own thing, and that didn't really help anybody, and the production was just nightmarish to endure. I mean, the anecdotes, I could make an entire video just about trying to explain the production and the anecdotes and the things that did actually happen that are not rumors. I think the most telling thing, though, something that I know no one in their right mind would ever do after this point, and especially not in today's world, in spite of all of their problems and the lack of everybody getting on with each other, when Columbia and started putting pressure on and threatened to fire Peckinpah off of the film, it was Charlton Heston who stepped up and actually offered his entire salary to keep Peckinpah from being fired, to keep him on the picture. He did this as a sort of gesture, thinking that no one would ever seriously take him up on that. And of course, they did immediately, several hours later. So he did the picture for nothing, and was true to his word of his probably about $200,000 or $250,000 salary for the film. He gave back, and Peckinpah gave back a giant chunk of his salary as well. So that definitely tells you something. And I really do think a lot of the performances you see here, I think Peckinpah got performances out of these actors that some of them I don't even know if they knew they had it in them or realized how good they were in the film. And chief among them is Heston. I think for me, this is the best film performance of his entire career. He's absolutely incredible and riveting as this multifaceted, nasty, egotistical, yet human character. It's such a hard to describe, but you love to hate this character in so many ways, which makes the audience identify with Tyreen so much, the Richard Harris character, who is the perfect foil to Heston's Dundee. And there's scenes together where they're sparring back and forth with two completely different acting styles. And Tyreen is this Irish character who wound up at West Point and essentially got thrown out of the military, mostly due to Dundee's own thirst for power, and then wound up fighting for the Confederacy, and then is now a prisoner of war under Dundee, which only adds to the venom in all of his dialogue. But yet he is still honor bound by duty. So he is technically the better man, but fighting for the losing or the wrong side. So there are many great themes at play here. I do think it is one of the great Civil War films, even though it's not in the traditional Civil War, a theater of war, and it's in the West, and they go into Mexico. And of course, it's great for history nerds, even though it does play around with history a little bit. It does get most things correct. So you have a Civil War era force of Americans wandering around in Mexico, and all of a sudden they encounter the French who are occupying Mexico at the time. So they wind up fighting everybody once they get into Mexico, and everything goes wrong. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of hard living. There's a lot of regret, and that of course sounds like it's right out of the Peckinpah playbook, which Dundee really is at the heart of that. I do think it is one of Peckinpah's best films. I think it is a masterpiece, even though uh, you have things like there is a female character and a love interest sort of shoehorned in the film, not very subtly, but Centerberger's performance is really great, so that helps to mitigate some of that. And you have, again, more of the Peckinpah stock company. You have the incredible Warren Oates and the great Ben Johnson, and James Coburn has a fantastic performance for early in his career before he was a major star in the U.S. As a one-armed half Indian scout, and he does it extremely well. That's not a typical character you would find in a mid '60s Western. And the other thing that I really enjoy that wasn't as apparent to me at first, but I did sort of pick up on it more and more over the years as I grew older and got more experienced in Westerns. And they do mention it in the commentaries and the extras, that there is this sort of perverse rendering of like the opposite, more realistic view of John Ford's West, particularly the cavalry westerns like Fort Apache. In a lot of ways, Major Dundee is sort of the darker underbelly, the reality of what a Ford cavalry western hinted at. In Dundee, things are always go wrong. People are imperfect, and things never end cleanly. And when there are the battle scenes, people die in grotesque, bloody, terrible ways. There are no good deaths in this film, because it is trying to stress that no, all war is completely ridiculous and repugnant. And that was something that caused another battle between Peckinpah and his producer in the studio. His intention was always to show violence for the sake of essentially rubbing people's faces in the fact that violence is terrible, and to provoke unnatural disgust, which is something he, of course, did in The Wild Bunch, which was completely missed by most people. But again, there's so much of The Wild Bunch that is starting in Dundee, which does also carry on from themes and elements that you can see in Ride the High Country. So I think it's an indispensable part of Peckinpah's career. I think it is truly a great film, even though it is full of imperfections. It makes it all the more interesting. Now, if we were to ever somehow have the mythical Peckinpah edited 2-hour, 45-minute version of the film, it would not be complete because he was never able to shoot the original opening sequence, as far as we know, along with some other things. It would, of course, be better than what we have here in the extended version. It would be Peckinpah's actual edit, but it seems that no longer exists and was probably hacked apart and destroyed as soon as it was made. But I think, in any case, this is one of those films that if you get into it, it never quite leaves you, and it is always riveting and fascinating, and every time you come back to it, you want to know more. You want to see it again. I just fell into this film all over again. It's been a favorite of mine ever since I first saw it. It's one of my favorite Peckinpah films, period. I do think it is a masterpiece. I really do. I thought that the first time I saw it, and I still think that today, and I've just really reconfirmed that. And this extras package on here is so good that my chief complaint is that it left me wanting more. I always want more Dundee information. I always want to know more because it is that fascinating. This is just one of those films that, if you're a Peckinpah fan, if you love this film, you really love this film. Like, there is no there is no halfway with Major Dundee. People either love it and become obsessed by it, or they absolutely hate it and they think it's terrible. There's no in between. But I just wanted to put this together and talk about this beautiful Arrow release because this may be catalog release of the year. It definitely is up there. I am so pleased at how well this turned out, and this beautiful package with the poster and the new art is beautiful. And since Sony completed this at 4K, and I don't know. Of course, any UHD would be a benefit. It would be great to see Major Dundee get a subsequent Arrow UHD release, as they've done with some of their packages, where, like on Flash Gordon or the upcoming Legend, they will release a UHD version as well. So perhaps maybe if they decide to do a UHD version of Major Dundee as a subsequent release to this, that would be very welcome. And of course, if anybody decides they have any new information to make new extras, because it seems the Dundee Odyssey never ends, and nor would we really want it to, because the whole odyssey of this film, its experience, the production, the history, the backstory, the edits, the cuts, the insanity that went on during the production, it all adds to the mystique and the mythos of Major Dundee and makes it all the more irresistible. So with that, and with the help of Mitch Miller and his sing-along gang, I'm off to fall in behind the Major, and we'll all get home again. Maybe some of us, not so much. Thanks ever so much for watching. Please leave any comments about Dundee or this release if you're interested in getting it, or if you've already gotten it and been digging through the transfer and its supplements. It's a beautiful release from Arrow, and I'm just so happy it exists now, so I have more for my Major Dundee obsessiveness. And with that, as always, keep physical media alive and keep your disc spinning.